Hello my friends, my name is Graham and welcome to my garage. In this video, I'm going to tell you how I built a Miata NC track car for under $10,000 and how you can too. In part one, I'll talk about some fundamentals like car selection and essential maintenance. In part two, I'll talk about safety, the things you want to have before you get on a track, the non-negotiables to keep yourself safe. And in part three, when you got a good car and a safe car, we'll talk about performance, how to make it a little bit faster of a good and a safe car. Let's get started. Part one, the fundamentals. We'll start with car selection. This is going to be very biased towards the Miata NC because that's what I can tell you about. That's what I know. First and foremost, the number one topic to make is swallow your pride. Low power is okay. Low power is okay for a couple of reasons. The first one is it's more forgiving. If this is your first track car, a little bit less power means you're a little bit less likely to overly aggressively hit that pedal, put too much horsepower to the rear wheels, and send yourself spinning with oversteer into a wall. On that point too, you'll learn a pretty essential skill that'll carry forward with you through the future you spend on the racetrack in different cars of more power in the future. That skill is preserving momentum. If it's tough to get up to speed, then you need to stay up to speed through turns, through a track, through any of the conditions out there. This car will teach you how to preserve that momentum to keep going fast when it's hard to get up to speed. Let's talk gearbox. Manual versus automatic. I'll tell you this real simply. Manual is more fun. This is not a manual. This is an automatic with paddle shifters. Why did I do that? Money. These Miatas in automatic with paddle shifters are a lot less desirable than the manual. The manual is more fun. This is a lot cheaper. Would I ever consider an automatic without paddles? No. You want that predictability. What about mileage? The good thing about these Miata NCs is those 2-liter engines and the ones produced in the United States are pretty much bulletproof. You can go with a little bit higher mileage. I wouldn't go with anything over 6 figures, but you can pretty much rely on these things to keep on running. Let's talk about things to look for. Let's say you've picked one of these out, you want to go take a look at it. Here's what I'd do. First, I'd go ahead and pop the hood. I'd walk around over to the front. And I'd take a peek in this engine bay. A couple things I think you should look for. One, look for any stains, any liquids that should be in a container that aren't in a container. It's a good sign that something's blown out, something's been overfilled, something's been fixed recently. If it's clean, let me say, if it's like dusty or clearly like not immediately cleaned, but you don't see any liquids anywhere, that's a pretty good sign. Another good thing to look for is this coolant expansion tank. These are known to fail pretty early in these Miata NCs. It's going to be the first thing to replace when you buy one of these, but take a look and make sure the lines are all good. There's no dried coolant. It's in the tank. It looks all right. Last thing, pop the coolant tank's cap and look for any milkiness. That'll be there if the head gasket's blown and you got oil in the coolant. That's an obvious no-no. Then go ahead and give this sucker a cold start. Look at the exhaust. If there's a puff of smoke coming out the exhaust, that means there's a little oil in the exhaust, and that's a problem too. So if the engine looks good, the exhaust looks good, the last thing I'd check is take a peek at the air filter. Why the air filter? I think it's a good indicator of what the previous owner thought about maintenance. If you got a dirty air filter with bugs and grass and dust in it, they clearly didn't prioritize replacing that. Cheap and easy to do. So if you find a clean one, it was on their mind. The maintenance and longevity of this car was something they were thinking about, so that's a good sign. So like we talked a little bit about, this is my MX-5 Miata. It's a 2006. It's an automatic. Why, all in all, did I buy this? A couple reasons. It's ugly and it's undesirable. It also, from factory, does not perform that well. It's got a ton of body roll. Body roll is when you go into a corner, you want the car to remain somewhat level, right? What this does is when you go into a corner and you start turning, it goes way up and rolls to a pretty good degree. And then you only have traction on the tires on the left side of the car, not on the right. Easily correctable though. But yeah, you can't correct the fact that it's ugly except with some stripes or something like that I did. But And the fact that it's an automatic too. All those things going together makes this a pretty cheap platform when NA and NB Miatas are starting to get pretty expensive. And ND Miatas are the latest, so they're obviously expensive, but these you can find and not put a huge dent in your overall budget. NC Miata, automatic with paddles, the least desired of all the Miatas, but it's the cheapest place to start, and you can build a pretty darn good car with it. So let's chat essential maintenance. You bought your car, you're happy with it, you brought it home. What do you want to do first? I'd immediately flush the oil. I'd immediately flush the coolant. By the way, I used the Mazda's OEM green coolant in here. Important to use the right one, right? Immediately flush the transmission fluid if it's a manual. There's a Motorcraft transmission fluid that performs really well in these. I'd let you Google that to figure out more, since I have automatic. In the case of the automatic, the gearbox is like really not intended to be opened. At least this is the way I understand it. So you just leave the same fluid in there and consider it a closed system. Also, the differential fluid. I bought some Redline differential fluid that was easy to drain that, refill it. When you got this on the track that's going to heat up, take a lot more use, it's good to just get that fluid swapped out with something a little more high performance. And just for the longevity and reliability of the car, it's a good idea. Things to check. Check your coolant tank. We talked about that. That's one of the first things to go on these Miata NCs. You can find aluminum coolant expansion tanks online. They're like $200. I just opted for buying a OEM replacement for like $70, and I'll just buy another one in another 10 years if I still have the car at that point. A little bit cheaper, but you know, I didn't feel the need to splurge on the aluminum one. Another thing is coolant hoses. I haven't seen it with this car, but just in general, as cars get a little older, those coolant hoses lose their integrity, but particularly when we're operating at a high heat on a racetrack. So make sure those are solid, they're not cracked, they're not dry rotting, they have good seals, there's no drips, because anything that drips in your driveway is going to be spewing on a racetrack. Radiator fan. This one in particular is kind of funny. These cars stay cool pretty well. To be honest, I didn't even realize my radiator fan was not working. Even here in Texas with high heat, this car stayed pretty cool. I wasn't using the air conditioner at the time, and it never got that hot except for one autocross when it got a little hotter than expected, and I realized the fan never came on. So that's clearly something that can go wrong, and it's actually a relatively easy replacement. Turns out you can just unbolt everything from the engine bay and push all the things to the side and slide it in and out without actually removing any hoses, draining any coolant. So easier than expected. The serpentine belt, it's another thing. Go ahead and swap at this point. It's a good idea. Get a good quality one in there. Just because that's not something you want breaking. And the last thing is seat belts. These seat belts on mine, as old as this is, they're a little gummed up, a little dirty, weren't retracting very well. The way I view it is, before spending $1 on performance, invest in safety. I went straight to Mazda and ordered replacement seat belts. Don't compromise on that. Don't build a under budget track car because you compromised on safety. Last recommendation of essential maintenance, go ahead and buy some rubber floor mats. If you buy a convertible and you dip it into the grass on the racetrack, you get some dust in there. Basically, the inside of your car gets pretty filthy when you're on a racetrack. The rubber floor mats keep it from impacting dirt and grass and dust into your carpets, and just makes it a heck of a lot easier to clean. So congratulations, you bought your Miata NC, you've done your essential maintenance. You're at a great point to start thinking about safety, the things you absolutely non-negotiably need to do before you go to a track for the first time. Let's chat about those. Number one, roll bar. This is the Hard Dog M3 Sport roll bar. This is a non-negotiable, y'all. This is rollover protection. The factory rollover protection, when you take it off, you're like, oh good God, I can't believe I trusted my life to this. Thin metal, but probably, just barely survives an impact, barely keeps you alive. I want something that is definitely going to keep me alive. This Hard Dog roll bar is proven through a lot of rollovers. You can see on their website videos and footage and photos of the after effect. This sucker will keep you safe if you send it tumbling. One of the first things I did was I went ahead and replaced the rubber brake hoses with stainless steel brake hoses. And the reason why is when you're on a track, you're braking far harder and far more often than you ever would on the street by like an order of magnitude. Your brakes, in particular, the fluid inside of them is going to get really, really, really hot. And your rubber brake hoses that come factory, especially on this one that was built back in 2006, they can't always maintain the heat. There's really two parts to this, it's the stainless steel brake lines, which can then contain upgraded DOT4 racing brake fluid. I put Redline RL600 brake fluid in here. That DOT4 racing brake fluid has a much higher boiling point, because basically what happens is when this stuff gets hot, it boils. When it boils, it then no longer keeps the hydraulic system working. Basically, you press the pedal, it goes to the floor, and you have no brakes. That is the last thing I ever want to have happen on a track day. So I went ahead and invested in those Power Stop stainless steel brake lines and that Redline DOT4 brake fluid. You're going to want to be changing this anyway when you're going to track days. I change mine once a year minimum, and just go ahead and get a bleeder kit with your air compressor and bleed those brakes and put new fluid in there. And just the last thing you want to compromise on is your ability to stop on a racetrack, especially when you're coming right at a wall, right? On that same topic, I went ahead and replaced the brake pads with Hawk HPS pads. They seem like a good hybrid of like mostly street but weekend warrior track brake pads. They're not crazy, like have to get them up to a crazy temperature for them to work. They're going to work out the gate, but they're going to be good enough for track use. And then last, seat lowering brackets. If you notice, the driver's seat is a little bit lower than the passenger seat. That's so that if you have a helmet on, you're sitting here, it'll be beneath the roll bar. All right, folks, that's safety. Once you got a safe car you can trust on the racetrack, if you roll over, you're going to be fine. If you press the brake down, even after 20 minutes straight, you're still going to stop. Now we can talk a little bit about performance. And here's where things get good, okay? You don't need to spend a ton of money here to have a pretty competitive MX-5 NC. I'll tell you what I did, and it's very minimal. I've spent the most of the money in safety, honestly, compared to performance, but let me run you through what I did. If you remember the beginning, we talked about body roll, right? There was a very easy fix to this. A lot of people will recommend like coilovers, lowering the car, a lot of expensive stuff. I took a totally different approach to that, and still maintain the stock ride height, which I'm actually quite happy about, because I don't have to worry about speed bumps or anything like that, and it still looks good. What I did was I just bought some really big, stiff white line sway bars. It's funny to compare, but you're talking about like 3 times larger, these metal rods that are the sway bars. I put the front at the stiffest setting that it supports, and I put the back at the second to least stiff. These Miatas prefer a looser rear. The body roll is practically gone. You can watch any other video on my channel from the driver view of on a racetrack. This thing is stable as can be going around corners. You got great grip from all 4 tires. That alone will allow you to smoke anybody through a turn. I'm not smoking anybody on the straight with this car, to be clear, but through the turns, you can keep pace with some fast cars by carrying momentum, having good traction just with those sway bars. Some other things I did, this might sound kind of funny, but I had to buy a axle-back exhaust for this. I bought a Cobalt exhaust. The reason why is I rely on the tune of the engine to know when to shift more than looking down at the RPMs while I'm actually driving, and I couldn't hear the stock exhaust through the helmet. That Cobalt exhaust is not obnoxious. It's just enough that you can hear it when you're driving through your helmet and have a good audio indicator of when you need to shift. Not too expensive, sounds nice, not obnoxious, but was pretty important for that. The next thing I did was a cold air intake. I like the idea of getting some fresh, cold air down here. I actually just bought a cheap kit off eBay and routed it down to, you can actually see the filter right there. So stock, the intake is somewhere behind the bumper, but I routed it down and into down here, so it's getting fresh, cold air coming in through the grill when driving. Does that actually affect horsepower? It's probably pretty minimal, but it's certainly less restrictive than stock, so it's only going to help. The last thing I did, Dynotronics down in San Marcos, Texas, specializes in these Miata NCs, and I drove it down there and had them do a bench tune, is what they call it. So they reprogrammed the ECU with a 93 octane specialized tune that, the way he explained it down there is it just smooths out the torque curve, gives you a little bit power here and there where it counts. We're talking maybe like 5 or 10 horsepower all in all, but just a little bit to smooth everything out. Yeah, that bench tune was the last thing I did to smooth out the torque curve and give me just a little bit more power than stock. And that's something you can do wherever you are in the United States. You just, to do this remotely, you basically pull your ECU out of the car and mail it to them. They'll tune it and send it back to you. Obviously a lot easier when you're in Texas. You can just drive down there, have them plug in a computer and do it for you. But that's the last thing I did to get some pretty good performance. And so I hope that was useful. In part one, we talked about fundamentals, buying a Mazda Miata NC, what to look for, how to pick one out, where you can save some money, the essential maintenance you should do to get your car in a good state. We talked about safety, the really important non-negotiable safety things you want to do before you get your car out on a track. Last, we talked about performance. Not actually the most expensive category, but where you can get just a little bit more performance out of this 2-liter 4-cylinder engine in these Mazda Miata NCs. But you do those things, you put them together, and you can have a pretty great track car for less than $10,000. This is a great platform, can't recommend it enough. It is the cheapest and best platform for a budget track car to get started. So that's my recommendation to you. Do with it what you will. Feel free to do something entirely different. I'm just trying to share what worked great for me, and hopefully it is useful to you too. If you think I'm full of crap, that's great too. Go ahead and leave a comment and tell me why, and make sure you like and subscribe so we can argue some more in the future. I appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching, and yeah, have fun.